On August 8th of this year, Five Nights at Freddy's turns 10 years old. It still amazes me on the longevity that this series has had throughout the years. Time really does fly, doesn't it? When it first came out, it completely reinvented the horror scene in gaming to the point of creating its own subgenre with mascot horror. And boy, is that subgenre taken off in popularity. Whether you like it or not, this game has had a universal impact on gaming ever since it was released. For me, it's one of my contributing factors that got me into horror games. If it weren't for the silly bear game with silly scares, I probably wouldn't be making content like this in the first place. So to commemorate the anniversary, as well as celebrate the impact it's had on me personally, I want to go over some of my favorite fan games that have released over the years. I have a solid list of fan games compiled that you may or may not have heard of, so it'll be a fun time. With no more procrastination, let's celebrate FNAF's 10th anniversary with some of my favorite fan games. With this list, I want to start off strong, so let's begin with my first fan game titled Juniors. I first discovered this gem when watching Markiplier's 2-part playthrough of the game, and I am so glad that I did. While the older retro style of the animatronics looks insanely unsettling, the aspect that has enamored me the most about this game is its gameplay. Here's how it works. The animatronics roam around the cameras and map like usual, but they aren't trying to get to your office. The threat comes from something else. Each night starts off with a ghost, or spirit, haunting one of the 6 animatronics: Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, Balloon Boy, and the puppet, or marionette if you want to get technical. The goal is to find out which animatronic is the one haunted and select them on your side panel to the very left. How do you find out if an animatronic is haunted, you may ask? I'll answer that in a moment, so stick around for now. Each night you must do this a certain amount of times for you to pass the night, with the number going up as the nights progress. That's another thing as well, there's no time limit to this game either. Your progression is based solely on selecting the right animatronic that's haunted each time. This also has the added bonus of making this one of the very few FNAF games that can actually be sped ran. I actually came to this revelation by watching David Barron's speedrun tournament of FNAF games, and one of the categories was Juniors, so that was a very pleasant surprise. If your suspicions are correct when selecting the ghost will be removed and you will have a short grace period to get your bearings before the next haunting begins. If you pick the wrong one, their stability will greatly decrease. Now you may be scratching your head wondering what their stability is. Well, I'm going to explain that to you now. On the previously mentioned side panel where you select the haunted animatronic, there's one other detail in that section: animatronic stability. Under each animatronic icon, each animatronic has a stability meter. This will slowly dwindle down as time goes on. If the meter reaches 0, they will jump scare you and you will lose the night. The only way to keep the meter up is by sending them to repairs. If an animatronic's meter is getting low, you can send them to your office for repair. Once selected, it will take time for them to get there, and once they do, you can act as the repair area, swap out their parts, and send them on their way. Do be careful though, for if the animatronic is haunted and you call them to the repair station, you will also be jump scared. Does that all make sense? While I can't hear you, I do hope the answer is yes. Now to circle back around, how do you find out if they're haunted? There are a few tell signs that I'll go over now. Quick note, they may be a bit confusing to explain verbally, but hopefully you'll get it. An animatronic is haunted if 1. There's flickering lights in the room they're in, 2. There's a handprint left on the camera after they left the room, 3. The camera is moving on its own with the animatronic in the room, 4. The camera is blacking out with a specific animatronic in the room, and 5. Balloon Boy's and only Balloon Boy's stability number is glitching out. These are the 5 tell signs that one of the 6 animatronics is possessed. The cool part about this that really gives an extra layer of difficulty is how hard it can be to spot said haunting signs. In most instances, there will be multiple animatronics in a room when you discover one of the 5 signs. When that happens, you have to debate and use the game's mechanics to figure out which is haunted in said room. You'll either have to wait for one to leave the room to see if the signs persist, or hope you get lucky and guess which one it is correctly. This makes the gameplay loop of Juniors fresh, and it is always a treat to play through. I've played and watched many fan games in the past, but I can confidently say that I've never seen more creative gameplay mechanics than Juniors. It's untread territory, and it's an innovative system. If I could compare it to anything, it would actually be the game titled I'm on Observation Duty. People who have been keeping up with the channel remember I talked about that genre of game, Anomaly Hunting Horror, in last month's video essay. The only difference between the two is one you look for differences in the environment, and the other you look for one of the 5 signs of a haunted animatronic. Juniors is a phenomenal and creative fan game, and I suggest that everyone watching it give it a go. There's a bunch of things about the game that I left out in this video, such as the game's story and its final night. It'd be best if you check that out for yourself. You won't be disappointed. Moving along my list, the second game I have to mention is the game Mechanism by YouTuber Andymatronic. Compared to the majority of popular or well-known fan games, the game is a lot more recent, releasing June 2nd of last year. A little fun fact about this game, the creator wanted to make it specifically so she could make an arcade cabinet for it. Yep, this game is made with the vision of what a Freddy-themed arcade game would look like. With how many arcade minigames there are in the FNAF franchise, you'd think this idea would be more prevalent. And while there are some standout examples, there hasn't been a large number of them. But I will say, Mechanism not only grasped this opportunity, but went above and beyond with it. Lucky for both you and me, the gameplay is much more easy to explain than the previous game. The idea is simple. You play as Freddy. You are given a battery meter at the top that goes down the more time progresses, and are given gears that act both as projectiles and health. Both can be replenished by drops in the levels. The goal of each level is to find a night guard and jump scare them. This will end the level and you will progress to the next one. The game in total, not factoring the other factors I'll get to later, has 20 levels. Seems quick and easy, right? Wrong! Despite its appearance or my brief description of it, the game has a reputation among the FNAF community of being really hard. To be transparent with you, I still haven't managed to beat this game. Something about this game is extremely difficult in its level design and its threats. Most enemies that you encounter in your runs are pretty standard and have a set pathing. You know, usual back and forths, ups and downs, etc. But there are enemies that are an exception. One of those is your biggest threat in the game. That enemy being the purple guy himself. While I'm not sure on which level specifically he's on, I believe he's in most levels you play through. He'll either be easy to spot in the open, or he'll be hiding away, waiting for you to pass by. Along with directly following you, he's a tank, with it taking 4 to 5 gear shots to kill him for the level. Oh, and did I mention that he's fast? He's one of the bigger skill hurdles in the game. On repeated runs, it's almost essential to memorize when and where he shows up in the game so you can conserve your gears. Whenever I played the game on a frequent basis, I had to use none of my gears just so I had enough to kill him and get past him. He makes for a good challenge as you traverse through each layout, and he's well utilized. Speaking of each layout, the different levels in the game are designed fantastically. The layout's different paths are super unique to the level you're in, and it never feels like retread material. Now that may be because there's only 20 levels, but each has a fun way to find the night guard, with the other parts of the level being room for secrets and extra resources. The creator added pretty interesting level mechanics in order to progress, such as going to lower levels with ladders, pressing buttons to unlock doors, going through vents, and more. And when I say vents, there are whole vent mazes to go through. Some of them I couldn't get through until I memorized them, which I guess you could take that as a critique, but I wouldn't personally take it as one, especially when you consider that the game is both built and meant to be replayed dozens of times over, like an arcade game. Last thing about the layouts, one aspect of them that I really like is they get more and more intricate the further you go. The skill ceiling ascends with each new level you complete and feels rewarding whenever you can reach a new height that you couldn't in your past run. In that way, it nailed it on the head with it trying to be arcade game adjacent. Speaking of feeling like an arcade game, the environments and sprite work are also well done. Each environment has, as it should, an arcade feel with the bright pizzeria colors covering every corner. Andymatronic perfectly captured the essence of the 90s pizzeria experience with how much the areas pop. The character sprites are even better. With translating recognizable media to pixel art, it's very hit or miss, but Andymatronic made each and every FNAF character fit the game seamlessly. I could say the exact same for our enemy sprites. One detail that's super interesting to me is how the level art gets much darker as you progress. We start off with the usual bright colors like previously mentioned, but the deeper we go in a run, we can see dimmer hues, scattered blood, and overall less joyous environments. Andymatronic knocked it out the ballpark with her sprite work, and I commemorate her for this. Before we move on, I want to quickly bring attention to the soundtrack, because when I say it hits, it hits. For our first attempt at a video game, Andymatronic developed a perfect adaptation of what FNAF would look like in 16-bit. To cap our fangame discussions off, we'll be ending the video talking about the fangame A Bite at Freddy's by the developer Garrett McKay. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I believe that the creator is actually on the team for Pop Goes Evergreen, one of the Fazbear Fanverse games. In fact, I initially found out about this game due to Kane Carter, Pop Go's creator, making a post talking about its upcoming release. The game released October 6th of last year and made shockwaves throughout the FNAF community. I remember playing it on the first day of release and having that experience of having to figure out some of the harder, more confusing mechanics on my own without the internet's help was a blast. In this section, I'm going to leave out some details because out of all the games I've talked about today, I believe that most, if not all of you, will enjoy this one the most, and I want you to play this spoiler-free like I did. Now, sit back and listen to me explain A Bite at Freddy's. This game takes place at a fast food chain known as Freddy Fazbear's Grill. Yep, we're doing burgers now. Y'all know the drill, our player character is hired and we get straight to work. Here's how the nights work. Each night, a cook, which is funnily enough our phone guy for the game, will send 3 orders across the restaurant via conveyor belt. They will arrive in the 3 rooms that have conveyor belt doors to them. They start in the preparing stage, then go to the sending stage, and finally, the delivered stage. You can keep track of which stage the order is currently in your office. Once they arrive, you go to that room's camera, click the confirm order button, and repeat the process. This goes on until you complete all 3, which then ends the night. In order to progress, you must stay alert so you can confirm the orders when they arrive. Now that we've established our goal for the night, let's move on to the threats in the game. Each of the 4 original animatronics are back, but with some funky looking redesigns. With Freddy, he's now dressed as a talk show host of sorts, with him donning a sleek red suit. Chica's theming is very different, as she sports a western outfit, cowboy hat and all. Bonnie has a very similar style to Freddy's, but on the Bite at Freddy's wiki, he's described as the wine connoisseur, which adds up with his appearance. Foxy's deal is that he's a scientist, and the area of the map where he appears reflects that. One thing that all 4 animatronics share in common is that all of them are missing their legs and are instead replaced with bare wiring. The explanation for this is actually quite cool. At the show stage where they start the night, Bonnie, Chica, and Freddy have places that they're attached to, with Bonnie and Chica having their own TV screens and Freddy being attached behind a talk show desk. What they're going for is to properly depict a talk show as mentioned before, and they've given the illusion of this without even including the character's legs. If I'm not mistaken, I've heard of similar animatronic structures being used for a few showbiz stages, but I could be wrong on that. Either way, I think it's a pretty novelty idea. And if you're wondering about Foxy, he has his own science lab area where he's placed. Now, let's move on to what threat they actually pose in a gameplay setting. The neat thing about these threats is that they have their own unique way of dealing with them. Crazy, right? Usually FNAF animatronics fall into similar mechanics on how to ward them off, but this game pleasantly breaks that trend. Let's go down our cast and discuss each threat that they have. We'll also be bringing up the game's core mechanics as we go, don't worry. Let's start with Bonnie, our wine connoisseur. Following the usual animatronic pathing, he'll slowly make his way toward our office. Once he arrives, he'll poke out his head and lock eyes with you at the side of the office area. To ward him off, there's a light switch that you must press so he slunks back into the pizza-filled depths. A detail about the mechanic is that when the lights are off, you can only see the bright glowing pupils of Bonnie. Even though this game really isn't a scary one, I still find it creepy and cool. Now onto Chica's gimmick. Whenever Chica makes it into your office, she will peek over specifically your office desk. After a few seconds pass, she will swiftly jump up and point her prop gun at you. On that previously mentioned desk of yours, you'll find a prop gun that's similar to Chica's. When Chica jumps you, you must grab the gun and shoot it in between her eyes. Doing so successfully sends her back to the Shadow Realm. This gimmick fits with Chica's theme around being a cowboy very well. Chica's encounters in your office play out just like a standoff in an old Gunsmoke episode. It has a lot of personality and I love it for that. The third of the bunch, Freddy, switches things up a bit compared to the previous 2. He attempts to get inside your office via vents as opposed to the hallway door. You must keep a sharp eye on the vent camera, for if you spot Freddy, you must activate a spinning fan of death in order for him to scurry on off. If you notice his presence too late, one of 2 things can occur. 1, he'll make it all the way to your office above you and jump scare you. 2, if he's further along the vent and you hit the fan, you will straight up decapitate him and leave his body without its head. And you may be thinking, that means I got rid of him. Right? Well, you'd be so wrong, because if you cut off his head, he'll come back to your office headless and jump scare you anyway. Moral of the story, keep a close eye on that vent at all times. Before we get to our final threat, Foxy, I need to explain one last mechanic of the game for Foxy's threat to make sense. With the past 3 threats, 2 of them have had mechanical means to warding them off. Now here's the twist. Anytime that you use something electrical in the pizzeria, which includes the fan, the lights off switch, and the vent entrance doors, a usage gauge will build up in the corner of the screen until you turn said thing off. If the aforementioned gauge reaches 100%, your power will completely give out for a short duration until the meter goes all the way back down. During this time, you are completely defenseless against the animatronics that's after you. This part adds something more to your plate that you have to manage across the nights. Defending against the animatronics is much more difficult now. Juggling everything together when each night adds more threats and such makes the gameplay loop interesting and satisfying to revisit. Even on non-hard difficulties, I still feel challenged by this game. Now that I've explained that, let's get back on track to our last threat of the main four, Foxy. Foxy's track throughout the pizzeria starts at his mini-stage and goes all the way to one of the back rooms. In there, he'll attempt to bite the bare wiring that connects to your camera. Upon success, your camera will begin to accumulate usage similar to the rest of your mechanics. To stop him, you must administer a controlled shock, right as he's about to bite it. Then he'll boogie on out of the room. I think that the Core 4's mechanics are very separate from one another and add a lot to the gameplay of A Bite at Freddy's. Typically in FNAF games, especially Fangames, they're sometimes victim of giving the cast of threats the same way of dealing with them. A great official example of this is Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Either you put on the mask or you flash your light on them. That's mostly it. It doesn't feel creative at times, and A Bite at Freddy's breaks this common trope in an excellent way. There were a few mechanics that I forwent mentioning, but with the script, I'm at a bit of a time crunch to meet the anniversary deadline, so you'll just have to see for yourself. Whew, what a ride. The making of this video is something I enjoyed a ton. Revisiting some fan games that I haven't played in a while has been a treat to do. All three games try out something unheard of in the FNAF formula in order to distinguish and make a name for themselves. In my book, they all stuck the landing. This bunch of games is some that I'll continue to revisit for years to come. Even after nearly a month of writing the script, it still feels weird to be coming up on FNAF's 10-year anniversary. FNAF has had really high highs and some low lows, but all I can be is grateful. This was my first taste into horror, which I've now made a hobby around. My very first video, and one of my most popular ones, was centered around FNAF. Needless to say, I wouldn't have had nearly as much success so far if it wasn't for it. So thank you to Scott for creating a franchise that helped me get into horror, and thank you to the viewer for giving me the time of day and watching this video. Well, that's all for me. Happy FNAF 10 everyone. Until next time, cheers!